Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. A quick reminder to please continue supporting the broadcast. Best way to do that is becoming a paid subscriber on Substack, $5 a month, $50 a year. You can also buy me a coffee, send reinforcements through Donor Box. We do for members. We do a weekly Zoom call where we shoot the breeze. You can also purchase a consultation to chat with me about whatever you like: expatriation, geopolitics, for the meaning of life, and also check out my affiliates, Legal Shield, Wise Wolf Gold, above phone. And joining us today is Morgan Lerette, who's an Air Force veteran, former Blackwater Mercenary, and author of the fantastic book that I have just finished reading, Guns, Girls, and Greed. I was a Blackwater Mercenary in Iraq. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Morgan.
No, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. And like I said, I enjoyed your book. It reminded me, when I was a kid, I would read Dick Marchenko, the Rogue Warrior, and your book reminds me a bit about of his writing style. And by the way, I'll start by saying my professor in grad school in Geneva was Saddam Hussein's defense lawyer. And some 20 plus years ago back in Chicago, where I'm from, I used to have a gorgeous Assyrian girlfriend who had escaped Baghdad. So those are basically my links to Iraq. And so your book is well written. Reading it, I actually felt like I was in Iraq. I could visualize sort of the scenery. And so what spurred you to write the book now, so many years later?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the intent, right? You nailed it. So everybody thinks they know what Blackwater was doing. Everybody has a preconceived notion. Really, what I wanted to do was write a book that people could relate to, right? We're young men. Most of us are young men, combat situation, making a heck of a lot more money than we've ever seen in our life. And what do you do in that situation when there's no rules? There's no Big Brother's not tapping on your shoulder. You just go out there, you complete your mission any way you figure you can. So I decided to write it because I got tired of hearing politicians and, Erik Prince has a book and there's journalists and their books suck. They just suck. So I really wanted to give that ground perspective, like what's going through my head as I'm, flipping my M4 off a safe and I'm getting ready to fire at the red car on the elevated highway. Like, what does it feel like? So from what I've been told, by you and others, is that it's a hell of a read, and it's like, sitting right next to me in the Suburban or the Humvee and rocking and rolling down the streets of Baghdad.
Yeah, very visceral, a lot of fascinating stories. And, you mentioned some of I was going to ask you about this later, but journalists, some of the stories that you were involved in, and the journalists trying to investigate that stuff and just getting it so wrong. But if you could, to start with, I think you served in the Air Force and then you got into Blackwater. If you want to tell us a bit about your background and then, getting into Blackwater.
Oh man, yeah. No, I was just the right place at the right time guy. Sometimes it helps to be Steve Jobs' friend when he's in high school, and that was kind of me. So I joined the Air National Guard in 1999. I was like the poster child, right? I was a poor kid from a small town, didn't know what I was going to do with my life. So the recruiters were just licking their lips. And my grandfather said, look, if you're going to join the military, join the Air Force. They just have better food. So that's all the thought I put into it, like literally all the thought I put into it. So I joined the Air National Guard. I joined the MP, which I thought was going to be military police, but really is just you like sitting there staring at planes into boredom for pretty much 8 to 12 hours a day. And we ended up deploying. I was young, I was single, I deployed all the time. I went to Oman, then we went to Jordan, Kuwait, and then Iraq during the ground offensive. So, I'm all jazzed up. We're going into the ground offensive. It's coming. And then you get there and the ground offensive moves so fast that it was actually just sitting there bored out of your mind, but not being able to shower with all your chemical gear on. Saddam Hussein was going to gas us at any moment. So it was pretty anticlimactic. I came home and my buddy that was in the Air National Guard was a former Force Recon Marine, and his name is Tony in the book. And he was like, I'm going to go work for Blackwater. Now, remember Blackwater in 2004? This was when the contractors got hanged off the bridge in Fallujah. That's all I knew about Blackwater. I mean, nobody even knew Blackwater existed unless you were like in the circle. So I was like, well, dude, have fun. That sounds like a great time. Try not to die. So he went to work for Blackwater. He put in a good word for me. And then Blackwater called me and said, hey, you want to work for us? It's like, yeah, not really. And then they said, how about for $550 a day? And I said, yeah, I would like to do that. I'll go put my life on the line for money. So that's how I got into Blackwater. Spent about 18 months doing everything from Saddam Hussein's like crimes against humanity. We helped protect the guys that were gathering all the evidence for his trials, him and Chemical Ali. Got to be on the QRF, which was like, if you ever go on YouTube and you type in Blackwater, Iraq, and you see the videos of the Humvees, that was me. Yeah, I was either driving it or I was one of the gunners. And then kind of ended up in Kirkuk. Just, you have to get into the book, but I ended up getting fired from Baghdad. So they sent me to Kirkuk because nobody tracks anything. Where I was a team leader, right? 24 years old, Air Force guy. I'm in charge of all these Navy SEALs and Recon Marines and Army Rangers. And I was like, holy crap, what did I get myself into? So I finished up with Blackwater, didn't know what to do with my life. Got my undergraduate degree at Northern Arizona University, joined the Army because, when you don't know what to do, we fall back on something. So I joined the Army, went back overseas in 2009, back to Iraq. They sent me to the same place where Saddam Hussein was hanged, which I used to drive to all the time with Blackwater. But instead of being paid, $200,000 a year, they were paying me like 75, which was a huge, huge bummer. I'm not going to lie to you. So I've seen both sides of it, the military, the contracting side, and it's just such a mess. It just really is a mess. And that's what I'm trying to get through in the book too, is you can sit there and you can say it was good or it was bad, but it really was just a mess. Whether we added value or not, it was like we just didn't coordinate with each other. We ran up, I don't think I put this in the book, but we ran up on an Army convoy and the guy took his 240 Bravo machine gun and pointed it at our Suburban. And I thought, well, we're going to get shot by the Army. Like, that's just how that was every freaking day. It's insanity.
Yeah, that theme is throughout the book. And then towards the end and your conclusion, you talk a bit more about that. If I'm not mistaken, I think one of the Blackwater contractors in 2004, I think Fallujah, I think he was a Croatian mercenary, if I'm not mistaken. I'm a Croatian American, so that's a bit interesting for me. And then also, what you mentioned about, where you came from and how you got to serve. I listened recently to Congressman Thomas Massey's interview with Tucker Carlson. It's a bit of a similar story. Thomas Massey came from, small town in America, ended up where he's at. And Erik Prince, of course, we have to bring him up. The founder of Blackwater. I saw him again on Tucker recently. He's, I think he's got his private phone. He's discussing in the book. You mentioned how you briefly met him. Just thoughts on Erik Prince.
Yeah, so in the book I talk about it. He flew into Baghdad, and we were hanging out at the helicopter hangar, and he walked out. And dude, the Blackwater guys, it's like the apotheosis of Erik Prince, right? They just elevate him up to God status. So he walks out and he's talking to us, and I'm bored out of my mind at this point. I'm looking around, and this car bomb hit. My buddy said it was a rocket. Somebody else said it was a mortar. I said it was a car bomb. I don't know what it was, but it started raining shrapnel on that hangar, and all of Erik Prince's bodyguards raced over, protected him, and ran him out. Which is kind of funny because like you're the king of the bodyguards, and you have all these bodyguards that are protecting you because you're so important. Erik Prince, people ask, like, was Blackwater good? Was Blackwater bad? Blackwater was, right? If Blackwater hadn't have taken that contract, somebody else would have. It would have been DynCorp, Triple Canopy, Aegis, Garda World, you name it. There was hundreds of private military contractors over there. So Blackwater, everybody just assumes was, the ones that were doing all the stuff that was good, bad, and indifferent. But that's just because they had the coolest logo, right? You had the bear paw with the gun sights through it, like. So I had so many people, Army people, tell me like, "Oh, you were Blackwater. We shot at you once." And I was like, "Well, you guys need to go back to the range because you guys missed us. Like, none of us ever got shot by you guys." So Erik Prince he's a genius for what he did with Blackwater. And then at the same time, he believes that every problem in the world can be solved by private military contractors. Now, I disagree with that. Like, I'm older. I understand like the morality of being in a combat zone as a civilian. Private military contractors have an extremely high suicide rate. You never hear about that. It's never tracked. But Erik Prince didn't create the VA for PMCs, right? There's no support system. You come home and it's just you. So you have all that PTSD, all that like fear, anxiety, anger. You come back and there's no way to outreach for support. So Erik Prince could say your grandma, your grandma's balding, and he'd be like, send in a private military contractor. Like everything to him can be solved by a PMC. Talk about colonizing Africa. The phone thing's a huge fiasco because he just got leaked that his WhatsApp conversation with Tucker Carlson was on it, got leaked. So it kind of gives a little bit of the mindset of the person that Erik Prince is and the people he surrounds himself with, and the way that they talk about how everything can just be solved with, more war, more PMCs, and, bigger bombs. And I wish that was the case. If it was, man, world peace, we'd have it.
Yeah, and you mentioned phone. Over a decade ago, I bought two of the black phones, which was founded by Silent Circle, which was founded by a former, I think, U.S. Navy SEAL, and those turned out to be duds. I've got them right here next to me, and so it's not easy with the privacy and phone business. What's left of Blackwater today? The last I checked, XE was named to XE. I was listening to your interview previously with my colleague William Ramsey, and you guys were briefly discussing this. Where's Blackwater today, and have their in their absence, have they been replaced, as you mentioned, by the market?
Yeah, it's dead. And I'll tell you how they got there, right? So you have the Nister Square shooting. Iraq kicked Blackwater the government of Iraq kicked Blackwater out. So Triple Canopy took over that contract, walked into the man camp and every other place that Blackwater was and said, hey, you guys are all now Triple Canopy employees, or you can go home. And everybody said, oh, I'll be a Triple Canopy employee. So all the exact same people, all the exact same contracts, just under a different name. Blackwater turned to Z and then to Academy, and then Academy turned into like the training arm. So if you go to Moyock, North Carolina, and you go shooting, they have great shoot houses, spectacular facility. That's Academy. Triple Canopy is pretty much taken over for Blackwater. And then both of those are owned by a company called Constellus, which is a conglomerate that does PMCs for everything from logistics to intel to private military contractors. When you think of guys like me that were walking around with guns and protecting people. So the only thing Blackwater still has is its cool logo. And it is a cool logo, but essentially if you buy a Blackwater rifle or Blackwater ammunition, it's being manufactured by somebody else and they stamp their logo on it and they say, it's Blackwater, so it looks cooler. But at the end of the day, Blackwater is about as dead as Blackwater can get. I mean,
all right, and there's a lot of stories in your book. I think you talk about John Negroponte, shoveling him around, and John Bolton. I mean, for me, he's a cartoonish figure with his mustache. Just any thought on being around John Bolton? He did, and you mentioned the book. The cool thing was that he did actually shake the hands of each of you, saying thanks for protecting him.
Yeah, we were kind of looked at like we were the knuckle-dragging Neanderthals, and the State Department were all the very elite people, which, I mean, they go to these fancy colleges. I get where they're coming from. So they just thought we were like, just above drooling on ourselves. They just thought we were the help. John Negroponte was the worst. That guy was such a dick. I don't know if I can cuss, but yeah, that guy was a dick. So he wouldn't leave the green zone unless he was in a helicopter. We literally had a helicopter take off from the green zone, go over a wall where the Kurdish embassy was, and land there so that he didn't have to drive and do a U-turn in the red zone. Like the guy was like scared of his own shadow. Michael Bolton, I don't know why he was there. He was in the green zone. Or no, he was at Camp Liberty over by the airport. And we protected him and we drove him around. He drank fine scotch and smoked cigars and told everybody how the war was going great. But he was a nice dude. Now, look, I hate almost all of his policies. I think he's the guy that would love to sit there and send everybody to war while he hangs back and says, "Oh, sorry you lost your arm." So I think the guy's a turd. But he was genuinely like a nice guy, right? He shook our hands. He said, "Thanks for protecting us." But he didn't go anywhere where we really had to protect him. We were just kind of driving around on a big base. But a lot of those State Department guys, it's in the story there, but one of them is like, "Oh, where'd you go to college?" Now, it turns out a lot of us had degrees. And they would say, "Where'd you go to college?" And, my buddy, actually, he's in the book. His name's Ray. He went to Harvard. Just to spite those guys. So when he came back, he had his Harvard degree, and they'd say, "Oh, where'd you go to college?" And he'd say, "Harvard." And they'd be like, "Whatever." And he's like, "No, seriously, econometrics, Harvard." But they looked at us like we were the help, which was pretty frustrating. But at the same time, we kind of were the help. So who knows?
Yeah, and then for people who haven't read the book yet, you said Michael Bolton, which I mean it's a joke that's discussed in the book,
Oh
but
yeah.
right, John Bolton, and something also that struck me because you're telling all these stories, people around you dying. I mean, there was an insane story with a BMW high speed crash and children involved, but you write, quote, "We laugh. Death is hilarious as a coping mechanism," and this reminds me of my Croatian Balkan culture where we're known for dark humor and as well laughing, because it's either you laugh or you cry. And any thoughts on sort of this?
Yeah, dude, it sucks, right? Like anybody that's lost a friend, whether it's, stateside or in a combat zone, it sucks. The problem with the combat zone is that you don't get the opportunity to sit there and mourn for like 2 to 3 days or weeks or whatever it takes. Your buddies, like we had two of the guys in the helicopter that crashed in April '05. I knew two of them. We had the kids die in the BMW accident. It just is absolutely like gut wrenching. And I remember when I was growing up, everybody said, all the politicians said, oh, these video games, they're desensitizing our kids, and that's why we're having so much violence. I'm telling you, that's not true. Like when you see a dude whose head is caved in, like you don't know how to react. But that's the thing about being in a combat zone is that you don't have the time to sit there and be like, oh my God, what's happening? You just have to start doing stuff. And you got the mission the next day, and you got the mission the day after that. So it really is a way, like using humor is a way to be able to deflect that. And maybe you put it in this little tiny jar somewhere and hide it deep inside you and it comes out later. But it really is like you and people that would die for you and the people that you would die for. And you're in this horrible situation and you're like, hey, you know what? You're ugly. Yep. And you smell like ass. Like I wish there was an easier way to explain it, but I mean, death is hilarious when you're in that situation, because if you didn't laugh at it, you would go through the process of trying to figure out how to mourn, and you just don't have time, man.
Yeah, you'd go crazy. And I sort of live in a mini, very light mini version of Iraq, here in Mexico, where there's death all around us, and so forth. And that's one of the coping mechanisms is just being silly and laughing. And do you feel that you won the Iraqis, the hearts and minds? How do you think Iraq is today?
Well, I think it's still a dump. But so in Ramadi, my buddy was in Ramadi, and he told me that the people of Ramadi essentially didn't dislike the military, but they sure as heck hated Blackwater, and they looked at Blackwater as the terrorists. And for good reason, right? Like we didn't follow the rules of the road. We ran people off the road. We shot at cars. Like we were assholes. We just were. At the same time, when you are faced with that decision, is that a car bomb? Is it not a car bomb? What do you do when you have the ambassador to Iraq, or you have somebody really important, or hey, you just don't want to have your brains blown out? Like you act and you react. So the people of Iraq definitely hated our guts, and I'll tell you why. Saddam Hussein, as big of a butthole as he was, kept everything in check. He kept the lights on. He cleaned up trash. He ran the government. Now, look, everybody was scared to death. Everybody had anxiety about it. But when they went home, they had air conditioning. We went in there and, we just freed the shit out of those people. We thought they are going to love us. And then we couldn't turn the lights on and we couldn't get them air conditioning and they didn't have garbage. And we got rid of the entire government and had to retrain a government from the ground up. Like, teaching people how to make schedules on an Excel spreadsheet, like literally that bottom level. And they couldn't do it fast enough. So that's why you started seeing it turn. And like '04, '05, it really started turning. And the other problem is that, Saddam Hussein was a Sunni. So he was the minority. And as soon as we put in the interim government and it was primarily Shia, the Shia said, okay, now it's our turn. Now it's our turn to have retribution against the Sunnis. That's when you started seeing the Sunni kill or the Shia kill squads going around Baghdad, kicking people out of neighborhoods, murdering the Sunnis. And that's why they all fled to Ramadi, Fallujah, and we had all the fighting in the Sunni triangle. So we went in there. I think if you look back now, and especially in 20 years, the Middle East is going to be seen as a tinderbox and still in flames. And the reason behind it is we took out the most stabilizing factor, which was Saddam Hussein. He was literally a stabilizing factor between the Sunnis, the Shias, Saudi Arabia, Iran. Like, you can't tell me Iran would have shot missiles over his airspace at Israel if Saddam Hussein was still in power. He wouldn't have had it, right? Like, he would have fired back at him. So we went in there and tried to force democracy on them, which they also weren't. I mean, I could pontificate about this for hours. But at the end of the day, like, you go from having air conditioning to not having air conditioning, you're going to be pissed. Like, it's hard to blame them.
Yeah, I've come to the similar conclusion that you have, and it's everything. It's not black and white, right? There's this gray area, nuance, and Saddam's not a great guy. I remember my girlfriend 20 plus years ago. She was from Baghdad, and she was doing everything she could not to go back to Iraq, but still, you look at one after the other: Iraq, Libya, right? Yemen, and everything's bombed to smithereens, and most people just want to have a house, as you say, electricity, have the garbage collected. That's like number one. It seems like, reading your book, you often thought that the war may have been a lost cause. We had these talks of WMDs that were never found. Has your view on the Iraq war changed from back then and looking back at it now?
I mean, it has, right? When I went in with the Air Force, I was like gung ho. This is what you train for. You train for war. You want to go to war. Like, and war has been really good to me, right? I wrote a book that paid for my college because I was in the military. War has been great for me. But when you start a war and you don't actually have an end state to that war, it is going to just last and last and last. And what we do now is, I call it like 180-degree morality. So we went into Afghanistan. I think that was the right thing to do, right? Get rid of Al-Qaeda. We get rid of Al-Qaeda, and then we say, yeah, but the Taliban is shooting at us. I guess we hate them too. We better shoot at them. And then we say, yeah, but we also need to help them have a democracy. And little girls need to be able to read. And we need to have schools, and we just keep our troops there forever because we don't actually have an end state, a goal to say, we met that goal, now it's time for us to leave. We did the exact same thing in Iraq. We went in there under, I think, BS pretenses with WMDs, looking back on it. But instead of us going in there, kicking out Saddam Hussein and saying, hey, you guys are going to fight anyway, let's just jam out. We were like, no, now we have an obligation to make sure that they have a democracy and they can pick up their trash. And like, all those things that we just kept throwing lives and money at that didn't come to fruition anyway. Because the Sunnis and the Shias were always going to fight. The Kurds were always going to hate the Sunnis and the Shias. Like, these go back thousands of years, and we were going to go in there in less than 10 and, create this bastion of democracy. So the short answer is yes, I've changed my view, but the reasoning behind it is not as simple as, oh, they didn't have WMDs. Because Saddam Hussein admittedly said, hey, I wanted everybody to think I had WMDs, right? I have Iran that I fought for 8 years in 1980 to 88. I didn't want them coming over. So, of course, I told everybody I had WMDs. So assume that that's true. As a U.S. military and as the U.S. politicians, you can't go into a war and not have an end state. And that's where we screwed up.
Yeah, we're seeing that all over the place now, even in Ukraine, I guess. And I recall, I think 2003 it was, before the invasion. I'm from Chicago, and I recall marching against the war effort in Chicago with, I don't know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And some of the stuff that I remember from back then, Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, Halliburton, and $600 toilet seats that U.S. taxpayers were paying for. Thoughts on sort of the waste of spending?
Oh man, it was so rampant. I mean, look, wasteful spending anyway, right? So KBR, DynCorp, all those guys, they had these contracts. They were cost plus, right? So if you spend $1, they give you $1.10. So you make 10% right off the top. What are you going to do with that? I'm going to spend more money so that I get more 10 cents. Like, that just makes sense. So they got all these contracts, and anything they could and couldn't like bring in there, they were going to do it. And they were going to charge the government, because the more they charged, the more they got. I remember in 2010, we literally had almost all of our infantry guys out of Iraq. And this guy came to our base and he was fixing lights. We're getting ready to give this base over to the Iraqis within like 3 weeks. And he's fixing these lights. And I was like, dude, what the hell are you doing, man? Who gives a crap? And he's like, if we finish up these lights, then we get a bonus for it. So we have to be able to complete this project. Then we get the project completion pay, and then we get the bonus on top of it. So we created a paradigm where the more you spent, the more money you made. And like everything that we did, why did we go and give them toilets? These people have never used a toilet in their life, right? It's just a hole in the ground. And I talk about it quite a bit, which, dysentery will do that to you. But we went in there, we're like, they need these sinks and they need these toilets. We took everything from these, like the Western government, all the way down to like toilet paper, thinking that these people needed all this crap. And we just kept spending money on it and spending money on it. And none of it was ever used. It was stolen and it was sold on the black market. But everything was a waste, man. Let's be honest here.
Pat Tillman, you mentioned him in the book, and just reading about him many years ago, I was a fan of his. After 9/11, he was going to be this NFL superstar, good-looking guy, strong guy, a good role model. He goes off to Afghanistan. You alluded to earlier situations of potential friendly fire, and so he died under suspicious, I would say, circumstances of friendly fire. I've seen the documentary discussing that, and just and he bought you a burger, you say, many years ago.
Yeah.
Thoughts on Pat Tillman?
Yeah, so he played for the Cardinals. I was working security for the Cardinals after I went to basic training and before September 11th. And he walked up to the table, was like, "Hey, I'm going to McDonald's. You want anything?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I tried to get my money out, and he's like, "Nah, I got it, man. I make more than you." So he came back and got me like a 2 cheeseburger meal. It's like the coolest thing ever. And he went to Arizona State. Like, he's a local legend at this time. I think he was a rookie. And then the dude gave up everything to go join the military. He will tell you straight up, and I think his brother wrote some articles on this, where when he was in the Rangers during the Iraq ground offensive, he said, this war is so illegal, right? Like it doesn't make any sense. So you brought in this guy that was able to think outside the box, whereas most soldiers like me were just, you go out there, you do your job, you hope you come home, you're good. And then he had so much media attention that when he died, they tried to cover it up, which is the worst thing you can do, man. So when I went back in 2009 and 10, we had a soldier die, and I had to do what's called the 15-6 investigation. And my command wanted me to go down there and investigate the soldier's death and say, oh, this is the fault of the unit that was there, or this is the fault of, try to find somebody to blame. And that's because Pat Tillman, because people didn't trust anybody else. So I ended up having to do a thing where it's like, look, who was at fault for this? The people that shot the rocket and ended up killing her. Like, they did everything right. The base is as good as you could get. But there was almost a desire from the command to say, now, who do we get to blame for this? And it was extremely frustrating, because you had this young lady that died, and they're like, okay, well, whose fault is it? Yeah, it's probably the rocket's fault. Like, let's be honest here. We're still at war.
Yeah, sad story, but a lot of stories in your book. You also mentioned returning to America after being away for so long, and finding you feel like a stranger. And that happened to me after I came back from Peace Corps Mongolia in 2007, living in a yurt in the Gobi for a year. And you kind of feel like, I remember going back to Chicago, where I'm from, and buying a pair of jeans, and the guy's like, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "I'm from here." And he's like, "No, you're not." And I'm like, it's just because you become a foreigner in your own land. Any thoughts on that?
Well, dude, it's hard enough when you come back with the military, right? So you go over to overseas, you have this little post exchange or base exchange, and there's some stuff. You can get some lickies and chewies, they call them, like beef jerky. You can get all kinds of stuff, but everything smells bland. Everything smells like dirt. So you come home, and the first thing that happened was I washed my laundry, and it just smelled so freaking good. And you go to the store, and there's all these cereals, and there's all this laundry detergent, and there's so many things to choose from, and you just feel out of place as a soldier. Now, when I came back from Blackwater, people knew who Blackwater was, but not really, right? You knew about the bridge stuff, but that was about it. And without going up and just telling everybody, hey, I worked at Blackwater, I used to be really cool, like you're just treated like any other person. And you go from literally being treated like the baddest motherfucker on the planet to, oh, that guy's just walking around and now I don't want to, wait on him, or I'm going to talk to somebody instead of ringing him out. Like it's frustrating. It's maddening. And I think that's a lot of stuff that you see with like contractor suicide, veteran suicide is you don't feel comfortable until you can finally take that breath and be like, okay, this is normal life. Like life did go on without me. And that's hard for people to swallow, right? Like, my God, I was gone for a year. My life stopped, but everybody else's just kept going forward. And then you come home and you're like fighting with your wife about, who paid the bills and how come the kids have more toys and all this other crap that doesn't matter. But by God, your life was literally on hold. I call it a worm tunnel. You go into the worm tunnel, a year later you come out and you're like, okay, I'm the same. And then everything around you is just different.
I remember our Greek American trainer in Peace Corps, fantastic guy. He told us, you don't know your own culture or country until you've left it and looked at it from the outside in. And I think many Americans need to do with that, especially to deal with some of the American exceptionalism. There's a lot of talk today about PMCs, mercenaries, except from the other part of the world, the Russian Blackwater Wagner group. Prigozhin died under mysterious circumstances. Was it last year? What thoughts do you have on non-American, mercenary companies like the Russian Wagner and whatnot?
Yeah, so Wagner or Wagner, if you're really cool, they are an arm of the military, of the Russian military. They have tanks, they have artillery, they have the ability to go out, take land, and secure it. Right? That's what an army does. PMCs in the U.S. and dude, it's everywhere. It's Great Britain, the Dutch. There's so many PMCs out there, and they're more protective, right? They're either protecting a base, they're protecting a person. Something is happening where they're more protective, right? They're defensive, whereas Wagner can be offensive. So that's your primary difference. What I am seeing is, dude, I thought military contractors were going to die, right? Afghanistan's done, Iraq is done. We don't need to have those people anymore. It's just gotten bigger. Because what's happened is politicians have realized I can send contractors over there. We have contractors in Ukraine, Haiti, Syria, Libya, Gaza. Like we have contractors everywhere, and you can send them over there and nobody cares because nobody knows how to really track it. Now you send soldiers over there and it's going to be a political fiasco. What's the first thing Biden said when he said, I'm going to create a port? No boots on ground. Which means he just had a bunch of private military contractors that were doing it. And it was a company, I think, called Fogbow that did it. So it's really become a way for politicians and departments like State Department, Department of Defense, to distance themselves from having soldiers on the ground. Because now it's the PMCs that are training the Ukrainians. It's not U.S. soldiers. Or it's PMCs that are, at the crossing between Gaza and Egypt and was it Rafah? Like, it's just, and if a contractor, I hate to say this, if a contractor dies, nobody gives a crap, right? It might make the news cycle for, 4 or 5 hours. If a soldier dies, it's going to be in the news cycle for weeks. So it really is the ability to have U.S. soldiers over there without actually putting the name on them.
Yeah, it's like a technical legal loophole. Just getting back to the Middle East, you mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the Middle East today. You got Israel, Gaza, of course, which can then lead to war with Iran. We're reading all these stories about potential war with Iran. That could spiral into World War III. The Yemen situation is ongoing with the Houthi rebels. In your book, you talk about Kurdistan, and then you've got the wars ongoing in Syria, right, in northeast Syria. You've got a bunch of American troops there as well, and so just thoughts. It doesn't look good. It's as you said. It just seems like it's going to be on fire for decades, and I worry about things just escalating. Any other thoughts on the region?
Yeah, what we're doing now is we're just supplying weapons for other people to fight instead of us fighting, right? And primarily you're seeing that in the Ukraine. And then there's the countervalence, which is China. And China says, hey, Russia, here's a bunch of our weapons. Go ahead and buy them and use them. We've been doing it in Yemen. We've been doing it in Syria. We're doing it everywhere, but we're not putting boots on the ground. So everybody kind of pats themselves on the back. What happens is we supply them enough ammunition and war materiel that they can keep fighting and nobody will ever win. I mean, that's really what all of these wars are going to turn into, is that until, the superpowers, the US is the worst about this, pulls back and says, look, these two people are going to fight. These two countries are going to fight. These two sects are going to fight. The Kurds are going to fight the Turkish, right? They want that territory in Turkey. The Kurds are going to want to fight the Sunnis and the Shias to get control over the oil in Kirkuk and Iraq. Like, at some point, we just have to stop putting our thumbs on the scale, take ourselves out of it, and say, you guys figure it out. And once you figure it out, we're here to help.
And so, yeah, my next question was a great power conflict. Again, it seems like there are multiple wars cooking on the international fire, right? In Europe, Ukraine, countries are calling for conscription now, Croatia, Serbia, Baltic countries, the UK. You've got stuff going on out there in Asia, Taiwan. This Asian NATO forming, the U.S. saying South Korea should have nukes, Philippines and Japan making these new military pacts to integrate their systems. You've got stuff going on in the U.S.-Mexico border, Guyana, Venezuela. I mean, we can go on and on. Just thoughts. There's a lot of talk. I mean, just a couple days ago, Telegraph, mainstream British paper, talking about World War III. You see these headlines from mainstream papers now. Any thoughts on where we're headed? It seems like, I like to call it the 100-year storm. It feels like the 1920s or 30s again.
Yeah, I mean, how far back do you want to go, really? Like, NATO has been poking the Russian bear for like the last 20, 30, 40 years. They just have been. They keep expanding closer to Russia. Russia's finally saying, look, we've had enough. Nobody cared about the Ukraine until, one, President Trump got impeached, and then two, when Russia invaded, it became this bastion of democracy, which is absolute trash. But it gave us a reason to give them a bunch of, money and things to fight the Russians against. Lindsey Graham goes out there and is like, a lot of Russians are dying, so we're getting good return on our investment. No, these are like real people. Like these are wives and husbands and sons and daughters that are dying in this conflict that we're just giving barely enough stuff to where they could just keep fighting. That's the travesty in all this. But I do think we're slowly getting pulled into a war, and I think PMCs are going to be what ultimately drags us into that. So look, in 2004, the Blackwater guys got hanged off the bridge in March. We sent the Marines into Fallujah. We stopped them. And then we sent the Marines in Fallujah again in October 2004. Marines died because George W. Bush said, hey, I don't really want to have the next Somalia, where U.S. soldiers are being dragged down the streets. So PMCs are in a position where it's going to affect our foreign and our war policy. And the more we put PMCs into that situation, the closer we're going to get to war. I mean, I wish I could say like it wasn't going to happen, but holy crap, man. Like I'm usually one of those guys that's like, oh, don't worry, it'll calm down. But I feel like it's two superpowers, it's the two bullies at school that are going to fight each other at some point. And, instead of one of them just saying, all right, dude, I don't really care that much.
How do you rate the overall sort of power of the different superpowers? We talk about Pax Americana, the West, Washington, Brussels, London, and then, the East, this Eurasian Pact, China, Beijing, Moscow, BRICS, whatever, multipolarity. And it's, the news cycle keeps saying, the West is on decline. The East, they have hypersonics. We don't have hypersonics. This and that. Our dollar is in decline. The inflation, the debt. How do you sort of rate where we're at in terms of peer competitors, great power, strength, and all that?
Yeah, I mean, I still don't think the U.S. has a real competitor, to be honest with you, because our military and our fighting force and our technology is absolutely spectacular. Now, I say that, and yet we just lost wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? Against people that had AK-47s and didn't have military training. Because what we do really well is we go in as a military and we fight conventionally. And then when the enemy doesn't fight back conventionally, we say, whoa, what the heck's going on here? And we try to kind of change the way that we fight, but not really, right? We change the way that we fight, but we also have these big, huge bases. And we're going to fight from these bases. Like it's never going to actually... you're never going to win against an insurgency unless you control land and you control people going in and out of that land. So militarily, I mean, China's force is really a defensive force. They don't have the expeditionary capabilities that we have, but China could take Taiwan tomorrow. And then what's the US going to do? The US is going to say, oh, you shouldn't have taken Taiwan. You're bad. But it's the same thing that we did with Crimea. It's the same thing that we've done with how many different small conflicts that we don't care about. So I don't know if the West is in decline as much as it is like the West is just, so war weary and so frustrated with war that they don't want to be in it, but they can't stop sniffing around it.
Yeah, that reminds me of my conversation some years ago with academic Michael Beckley, who, and what I could see this being the case. I oscillate between the West is in decline or, America militarily has this superpower status, and I could see it going either way. And Michael Beckley said that America will remain the superpower, and so I guess time will tell. And what you mentioned about Taiwan, I think it was last year I met General Robert Spalding at a conference, and he'd been stationed in, I think it was Taiwan or somewhere in China, and he said what you just said, that if China goes for Taiwan, we can't do anything. The best we can do is evacuate the Taiwanese, and then so that's what I've been hearing. I'm done here in Mexico. In months past, we do have this organized crime issue, the cartels, the narcos, and we've had American politicians in months past saying we should send special forces into Mexico. I guess it looked like that movie with Sicario, right? Or I don't know if they would send PMCs into Mexico. I mean, just thoughts on the situation here, and like, would that even be possible to send PMCs or U.S. troops into Mexico?
Yeah, look, if somebody pays enough money, PMCs will go down there. That's just how it goes. So if they wanted to, create private military contractors and send them down, they probably already would have. But there's not a whole lot of people that are saying, "Oh, I want to go hunt the drug cartels." Right? That's a crazy endeavor there. But the U.S. Mexico border and Mexico itself, I mean, it's so difficult because they're bringing all this stuff up, all the drugs, because we love drugs in the United States, right? Like, I mean, I'm not a big fan of cocaine. I've never done it, but at the end of the day, there is demand and they're going to do the supply. So I think if you're wanting to stop all that stuff, you're going to have to actually stop why people are using it in the United States. Because anytime somebody can make money off of, fairly easily, right? I mean, I don't know what it costs to manufacture cocaine, but the margins have got to be great. So I guess I wouldn't be shocked if PMCs were used. I wouldn't be shocked if PMCs are being used currently through like the CIA or the DIA or the NSA in Mexico proper. But as a large force, you just can't do it. They have to stay extremely small. And if they're that small, you're not going to make a dent in anything that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the drugs, I was talking to a Mexican cop the other day, and I asked him about some of these things and the fentanyl thing, right? And he told me that the fentanyl is being made in China and coming in through the the port on the west of Mexico, and then being sent up through Mexico to the U.S. And I've had on Ed Calderon, the famed Ed Calderon, on the podcast, and he also sort of added to that idea as well. Just quick, thoughts on the state of things at home in America, whatever you think is important or interesting. It seems pretty chaotic, elections, all this, persecution, political persecution. There's talk of a second civil war, movies pushing that. And what's most interesting for you at home?
Yeah, I feel like politics has taken over religion in the United States, right? Like, it used to be that you would go to church and then you'd be around the people that kind of thought the same way. And then the baby boomers stopped going to church. And now it's like everybody is so set in whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, and I'm pretty much down the middle. Like, I don't care either way. Like, economically, definitely conservative. Socially, I don't care who you love. I don't care who you kiss. I don't give a crap. Like, if you want to do that stuff. But we have these on both sides. We have people that are trying to regulate the morality, right? On the right, they're saying you can't have an abortion. On the left, they're saying, hey, if you got a big, huge penis, go out there and swim with a bunch of girls. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's pulling further and further apart, and the middle is getting smaller and smaller. So that's why you have the absolute stupidity and the insanity of this election cycle is everybody wants to be right instead of just being happy. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'd rather just be happy, but our foreign policy has absolutely been decimated under the Biden administration. It has. When it comes to the border, when it comes to overseas. I mean, if you're going to try to project power, you better project power because you can't lead from behind or all the other garbage that people say. You either have to be in charge or you're not in charge. And the U.S. is trying to play the line like, oh, we're going to help, but we're not really going to help. We don't want to be in charge, but we don't want to cede power. I mean, look, we'll see how the election goes, but oh my God, this place. Let me take that back a step, though. When Jefferson was running against Adams in the second presidential election, Adams told everybody that Jefferson was a hermaphrodite. It's always been gross. It's always been scummy. Politics is always scummy. But at the same time, like we have taken it to a level with the ability to like surround ourselves either via social media or who we hang out with to our political sect that now people are saying, oh, we're going to have a civil war. We can't have a civil war. Come on. Like you're ridiculous.
I would agree with you. I mean, it's become a religion, but not even an exaggeration. There's the book that I'm reading. Hopefully, I have the guy on in the future where he talks about the politics. It's basically democracy. It's actual religion, civil religion. You see people basically worshiping idols, and their politicians become their gods. And this polarization, as you mentioned, it's insane. It's just, can we just get on with life? And I remember the '90s as a kid. It's just like you go to school, you work hard, you try to get a good job, get married, like what most people do in most countries, instead of getting absorbed in this madness. And so, and any other thoughts? Again, I highly recommend the book. I purchased a copy on Kindle. Any other key points you think important to get across?
Yeah, I mean, if the world is on fire, we probably just need to stop throwing gasoline on it. That's really what it's coming down to. I'm starting a political party myself called the Leave Me the Fuck Alone Party. Here's what we do. You leave me the fuck alone, and I leave you the fuck alone. And people say, oh, that's the libertarians, but it's not. Libertarians have turned into these weird people. Like, just go out there and live your life and stop trying to surround yourself with what's happening elsewhere. I think we've internalized, the pain of others to the point that we want to just go out there and help, but we have no idea how to actually help. So we're empathetic, and then we go over there, we just screw everything up. I don't see it getting better under this current administration. Maybe Trump can come in and kind of, rejigger some stuff like he tried to last time. But look, the war machine is always going to be the war machine. The political machine is going to be the political machine. Like, just listen to your podcast and enjoy the heck out of your day.
Yeah, keep your head down. And try to get on with the day, as you say. And yeah, all right. The book again, the exact title: Guns, Girls, and Greed. I was a Blackwater mercenary in Iraq. People can get the physical, digital. They can also follow you on Twitter X at BlackwaterDude1. All the links are in the description. Any other projects you got going on, or best places to find you?
Yeah, well, I'm on Instagram, I'm on the Twitter, I'm on TikTok. If you want to see me dancing, I'm terrible at it, but if it sells a book, that helps. I am working on a second book, kind of looking into like the veteran suicide stuff. I'm a little bit frustrated with everybody saying like veterans commit suicide because they join the military. Like, there's 18 to 20 years before they join the military. There's 18 to 20 years after they join the military. Why are the suicide rates for Vietnam veterans higher than global war on terrorism veterans? So I'm trying to write a book that kind of digs into that a little bit so that people don't just like write it off as a platitude. Like, dude, Blackwater has had I can't tell you how many guys have committed suicide that I worked with. because they come home and they're just alienated and you don't have your friends and you don't have anybody else. They're either overseas or you're texting them or you're on Facebook. Like we need to have a deeper conversation than just sitting there and saying, oh, he joined the military. He was in supply in Kuwait. He had such a tough life. He killed himself. Like it's deeper than that, man.
Yeah, many years ago, I had family that and friends and folks. I knew people who were drone operators, right? They were in the U.S., but they were operating the stuff abroad, and even them, if they weren't physically there, but the stuff that they were doing virtually, you could tell it was disturbing them. So even that alone, creating, you're killing people, through the screen, and so it takes a toll. I mean, you could see with
I've
people.
got a theory. I've got a theory because my brother was in the military. He served in Iraq, and he called me one day and said, "Hey, I parked over a grenade today." And I was like, "Oh, did it blow up? Like, what happened?" And he's like, "No, we just parked over a grenade." And I was like, "Yeah, but who gives a crap, dude? Like, I've walked by bullets and they don't go off either. Like who cares?" So guys like me, dude, I don't internalize it, right? Like, it wasn't me fighting against somebody else. Them trying to kill Morgan. Like, if I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, hey, I could have been the victim of it. A lot of people, I think, went overseas and internalized it, and they took it personal. You can't take war personal, and there's nothing more personal than war. But you can't bring that home with you, or try to ignore it for too long. You just have to say, look, it was the wrong place, wrong time. Like, yes, it was stupid. Maybe we shouldn't have gone in, but I still got to live my life. And I just don't think that there's a lot of military members like after the World War II generation that came home and became air conditioning or mechanics or all those other things where you work with your hands and you're with people. I don't see that happening as much. And I think that's kind of fueling it, is internalizing it and then not having anybody to talk to.
I think that's, you're onto something. It's the social media and internet and coming back, and it's been atomized American society. I remember we got the euthanasia MAID program in Canada, and recently, they're supposed to vet the people who sign up to have the government kill them. And there was one lady that snuck past them, and emails that were revealed after she went through the program, she would have been disqualified. She said that basically, I'm all alone and I don't have anyone, so I just kind of feel lonely and I want to kill myself. And it kind of rhymes with what you're saying, where before we would have a social network around us, which kind of slaps you on the butt and tough it up and get on with life. And so we'll be looking for your second book again, Guns, Girls, and Greed. Morgan Lerette, thanks for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Thanks so much for having me, man.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.